They build an alpha beta version of the product. Very nominal revenues, because in B2B in the first 18 months you don't expect, right? So you basically have, and then the major part is also recruitment, right? So because we have to find those co-founders who are better than us and who come and replace us, right? And take the company forward. So at that point in time where they're really ready for the next round of financing, right? And that's when, usually some of these companies, they're at our office and they leave, they find premises. And we've been fairly successful, almost all of our, we haven't lost a single dollar. We've been around since 2012. We made 24 investments. We have 5 exits so far, and most of our companies went on raising A, B, and one of the companies, Foghorn, we started at the Hive, and now it's one of the very well-known companies in IoT space at the moment. And so that's about Hive, and we'll talk more. So thank you for listening to me.
Excellent. Thank you, Mohan. So now we know about this co-creation studio model. So that's very interesting. Okay. So briefly, you saw Arun couldn't be with us, but Ron actually has some of you actually know Ron, so his role is very interesting. So I will let him say a little bit more. But what I thought he can actually provide us some interesting insight is he does help. It's like when you find yourself on the wrong track, that's how I envision. Ron is the one who will bring you back on the right track and help you kind of stay on that direction, right?
So thank you for telling me why I got invited onto the panel today. So many of you know me. I was a software developer for 7 years. I became a manager at Apple, spent 7 years at Apple, then walked through 3 startups, one of them internal to Fujitsu, the other 2 truly VC-funded startups. Then went to Schwab, then went back to startups, then went to medium-sized companies, then went to startups. As I began thinking about it, and I've been consulting for about 6 years as an interim VP of engineering, I began thinking about where do I fit? And so where do I fit has to do with what companies need help with management and leadership. There are a couple of things around that I'll say it by way of introduction. One is that I've been thinking about leadership since maybe before I went to Apple, but for sure after. I spent 7 years at Apple, so I was at Apple between jobs. Let that ring. So Steve had left, Steve hadn't come back. I was there between jobs, and the culture was Steve's. The culture was the Steve Jobs culture, even though Steve wasn't there anymore. And it was an interesting culture in that the next place I went was Berkeley Systems, which made screensavers, After Dark and flying toasters and fish and all those things that saved CRTs back in the day. And it had culture also. It was a startup. It was VC funded. It was looking for it was niche player by doing that, but it was looking for other markets. And so when I left both of those, I had very different experiences. The experience that I've had after Apple has been one that I know almost no one who left Apple who doesn't root for Apple still. On the other hand, when people got laid off from Berkeley Systems, and a whole bunch of people got laid off from Apple. Apple had ups and downs, and between Steve and Steve, it had some real downs. And a bunch of people got laid off, and they all rooted for Apple still. People got laid off from Berkeley Systems, and the first thing they did was to start an online thread called Burnt Toast. The first question of which, how have you been burned by Berkeley Systems? Now, what's the difference between the culture there? And then what was the difference at Schwab, where I found also a 25-year-old company, as Apple was when I was at it, a company that very much empowered the people who were working there in a way like Apple did. It was more like Apple than almost any other company I've seen. Charles Schwab, a financial services organization, with one difference. Chuck Schwab is possibly the nicest guy in financial services, and we know that Steve wasn't the nicest guy in technology. And both of them empowered people, and I thought I had seen the peak of leadership when I was at Apple from what Steve had done. I thought the peak of leadership is leader as televangelist. Steve was able to, like a televangelist, stand in front of an entire crowd, describe a product or an idea or a process, and make it swim in front of your eyes. And I thought, wow, that's the pinnacle of leadership. And then I got to Schwab, and I found something that was one level higher than that, which I didn't know existed until then, to Kwong's point of we don't know what we don't know. And that was leader as, so inspirational leader. Chuck Schwab was not a speaker, an inspired speaker, but Dave Pottruck, his co-chair, was, and our CIO, Dawn Lepore, was. I can still tell you stories that she said in talks she gave to us as technologists. She inspired us. And he and Dave and Chuck inspired us, and I thought, wow, now I've really seen inspired leadership at this point, and I started thinking about that. So that's leadership on one side. Management on the other side, I thought, so where am I going to fit? I'm thinking about consulting, and so in the terms of startups, so I know I can fit in large companies, I know I can fit in medium-sized companies, but how about startups? So the average startup gets started by a VP of engineering who is the coder. Codes 100% of the application for the first 6 months, maybe the first year, maybe the first year and a half. Then they've got enough angel fund, enough MVP and enough angel funding to be able to bring in 5 other developers, and the VP of engineering still codes half the app, and the other 5 people code the other half, because he's still the inspired guy. Occasionally it's an inspired woman. And then somewhere along the way, they get some more funding, and they get some more engineers, and then and at some point they get a round B, and round B, the VCs come in and say, wow, everybody's going in different directions. There's no one actually leading this thing. You're all a bunch of technologists. We need a leader. And I thought, okay, so this is where I fit. And then I got hired into a startup of 5 people, 6 people, 4 engineers, and a VP and a CTO. There was no VP of engineering, and a CTO and a CEO, and not one of them had a project management bone in their body. They desperately needed me for that. It wasn't what I was expecting. So part of what I want to say is that what we need of managers is really broad. What we need of leaders is really broad, and it includes technology, it includes leadership, it includes management, it includes project management, it includes execution, it includes innovation, it includes this whole range of things, and it's really complicated. So I want to give you one other thing. So I'm mentoring a VP of engineering and a CIO and a CTO and a director of engineering right now, and I've done several of those over the past few years. And I have for a long time said the thing that makes you successful at one level gets in your way at the next level. So I've said this to some of you already, and the obvious one is when we go from being programmers to being managers, the thing that makes us successful as programmers is the ability to climb into the microprocessor and listen to the gates open and close. It's the ability to shut out the world and become one with the code and one with the computer. And when we become managers, what makes us successful is not just putting a welcome mat out in front of our door, but proactively inviting our people to come and interrupt us, because their problems are more important than anything else. Our team is the important thing, and our boss is the important thing, and our colleagues are the important thing. Our job is a people job. And the same thing is true when we go from first level managers to directors of engineering, and from directors of engineering to VPs of engineering. And I've said this for a long time, and somebody came along and said, Ron, there's this book, you've got to read it. And it talks about this, and I've been recommending this book, so I'm going to recommend it to all of you. And it's a book called The Leadership Pipeline. The Leadership Pipeline was written with the idea that that you need to prepare the people coming after you as a leader to be ready for it. But what it does is, in doing that, what it does is to lay out, here's what it is that an individual contributor needs to do and be. Here's what a manager needs to do and be. Here's what a senior manager needs to do and be. And a director and a senior director and a VP and a senior VP and an executive VP, and then finally the CEO. Now, I don't want to be a CEO, so I don't care about that one, but all those other levels are really important to me. And what happens in startups very frequently is that the person who's the first level manager is also the most senior manager. And the leadership pipeline points out that when we jump levels, we miss the learning at those levels. The leadership pipeline is a useful book in looking at what did we miss, what do we need to fill in, what are those gaps, what do we need to do remedially. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. So, bringing startups and actually more mature companies on the right path, I think that's actually a good thing. So, let me see. Okay, so about me, I'm currently VP Engineering at Seismic, formerly Rocket Fuel, working in different domains, different technologies, passion for innovation, and these kind of things, right? So care about leadership, but also innovation and doing things. So, but this is not about me, let's move on. So this is actually interesting thing. This is email that I got maybe a couple of days back. So, and I was really pleased because leadership education for engineers. So there is hope, right? But the question is really what kind of things they will teach you. So I will go back to the panel. But this is definitely something that I think there is awareness, because there is a lot of Coursera, others, they are helping, like you can get technical knowledge. But what I really find interesting is what Kwang is doing and mentoring. So for instance, I was involved, I'm still involved with the Founders Institute, which is mentoring startups. But typically it's about helping them define a product, etc. It's not about strictly engineering leadership, and that's the topic that we have tonight. So let me actually go back to Peter. So we heard, and we'll get back to actually startups and co-creation studio. But I want to go back to SAP Innovation Center, because you have kind of like option, probably you have a pool of people who would like to be involved. You have infrastructure, so you can kind of like big companies have some training programs, etc. So how useful are these for Innovation Center? And how you actually identify who is the right material to really drive some of these new ideas, and so maybe you can help us understand better.
Yeah, super. Yeah, where should I start? I mean, there were really, really good points here that I would like to pick on, but let's maybe stick to your question in the first place, right? As I've been saying, it is really hard to find the right people that fit into this innovation umbrella. I think oftentimes I find it very overused, this word, and I think it really is. But eventually it comes down to what I'm looking for, what the team is looking for, is basically a term shaped by the D School, also by Hasselplattner, our founder, which is, I'm very much looking for T-shaped people, right? How many are familiar with T-shaped people? Yeah. Good, that's fantastic. And so that's definitely something that I'm looking for. So people that have a very deep expertise, let's say in engineering, right? That's one thing that is really critical for us. When we do our interviews, we definitely put everybody through coding interviews like everybody else, right? But then the component, the crossbar really, that is something that always fascinates me, and that's something where I'm always looking for what have the people done, what is their crossbar, right? What is their extra skill, what is the extra effort they have been putting into this, into their education, into their background, and that goes also a little bit back to my background. I tried really to go deep into engineering and really hone my skills there and go through the loops and hoops that are necessary. But eventually I realized I have to put this crossbar on top, and that can be an interest, that can be a certain skill. In my case, really, I wanted to improve my design knowledge, my design background, and my design thinking, how you also go about the problem finding part, right? Because design thinking in that case is really how do you find the right problem to solve. There are multiple steps to it, and so on. It really takes the designer's mindset, how they use a research, and puts it a little bit into practice for engineering. And that is definitely something that that we at the Innovation Center are looking for in people, that they have this crossbar. And also we need this crossbar because we put them again into teams that are very homogeneous, right? They're really diverse and multidisciplinary, because we have people in the first of all, like from various cultures. That's one thing really, which could be the crossbar. I think we have 26 different nationalities in the team, which definitely